I am delighted to welcome to the Truth and Rhythm Mothership, Dave Darlington, a multiple Grammy-winning engineer who has amassed more than 1,000 album credits during the past 30 years, and that is only the tip of the iceberg. He's been particularly successful in the R&B and jazz genres, working with many of the biggest acts. Dave, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm good, man. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, fantastic to have you. So, and you're coming to us from where today?
I'm in Manhattan right now. This is my studio on 29th Street. I've been here since 1997. And prior to that, I was on 23rd Street. And I started my career in the Times Square area way back in the 80s.
Wow. And is that where you're from originally?
No, I was born here. I was a little kid here in Long Island. My parents were suburbanites. My dad worked for Eastern Airlines at Kennedy Airport. And when I was 12, Eastern Airlines decided they would collect everybody to Miami. So he announced that we'll move to Miami. And we were, all the kids were like, no, I don't want to leave. And they said, well, you'll have your own bedroom and you have a swimming pool. So we went, what time is the plane? So that particular year, interestingly enough, was the year the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan. So my childhood is in Long Island with baseball and basketball and skateboards. And then my young adulthood is in Miami with Beatles and surfing and girls. It's a complete dichotomy. I really have a line of demarcation in my youth. And of course, once the Beatles came on TV, all anybody wanted to know was where do we get an electric guitar and how do we work it? So I'm sure many of our generation have the same story. That's the start of it all, really.
I have a little bit of the tale of the two coasts also, because my entire family, except for me, was from New York area, and my wife is from Long Island.
Oh, wow.
But I grew up on the California beaches, so
nice.
I had a little bit of the two worlds too, like you.
Yep.
So it's great to connect with you. I want to thank off the top our mutual friend, Bob Grossman. Thank you to him for bringing us together.
He's one of the reasons I have a studio, because we were playing in Atlantic City and we needed a place to sleep. And he said, well, I have an extra room you can rent for the duration. And so I crashed at his house and he had an actual recording studio in his house. We're talking in the late 70s, early 80s. I thought, this is amazing, right? In his suburban house. And he said, yeah, it's just a computer and a tape recorder and a board. And wow, I could do this too. He really planted the seed in my head. And in fact, he was just here a month ago. We redid all my wiring. He was down on his hands and knees with me pulling out power strips. It was crazy. He's absolutely the best.
Yeah, I've known him about 20 years. Good friend.
Yeah.
But I feel such a connection to you as well, even though we just met, because as we were talking before, I came up being deep into music and going through the DJ route and just constantly archiving music to reel, different formats, making mixtapes.
It was always about collecting, like how do I have all the Herbie Hancock? Oh, here's one I don't have, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So
I'm sure you remember going to the record store with your buddy, and you each had enough money for one album. So, I'll tell you what, you buy the Earth, Wind and Fire and I'll buy the Kind of Blue, and then we can switch the next Saturday.
And also feeling like almost like a messenger of God to spread the great music to as many people as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It was all about what you knew that was really cool and the other guy didn't yet know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were the days. So we know a bit from where you're from. How did you, really gravitate toward studio work? And I know that you're also musical to some extent. How did that evolve?
Well, I went to school in Gainesville, Florida to be an architect, I thought. And then I didn't like it much the first freshman year. It was not my thing. But I was playing electric bass and I got into jazz. Suddenly a lot of hipper people older than me were teaching me about jazz. And I thought, well, how can I get an upright bass? Well, how do I go about that? So I went to the music school, asked them what would it take for me to have an upright bass to take home. And they said, well, we always need live breathing bodies in the bass section. So just show up Monday night and Wednesday night and you can take the bass home and practice. This is great, a win-win. Long story short, I took the bass home, played in the student orchestra and learned to play a little jazz and loved it to death, switched my major. And I was working in Florida as a symphonic bass player right out of college for a while. I was in Jacksonville Symphony for a few years, and then I was in the Tampa Symphony for a few years. And I liked it. It was a good, steady gig, you know, a pension plan, and dry cleaning allowance for your tails. But I started looking at the older string players, and they were not the happiest people in the world. You know, those 50, 60-year-old viola players were like, oh, not the Shostakovich again. I thought, that's, you know, I'm in my mid-20s now and loving everything about music. And I thought, well, that's, if I stay in this path, that's going to be me when I'm 60. So through a circuitous route, I threw everything in the van and played in some bands on my way up to New York. And somebody told me, you know, if you go to the NYU bulletin board, there's always people looking for roommates. So that's what I did and found a roommate. We're talking in 1975, early 75 now. And I got the Village Voice, which was the local paper. I'm sure LA had a paper like that. You know, bass players wanted, musicians needed, must sing background vocals, that kind of thing. So I answered some ads and got a gig. And so here I was in New York, like not knowing really anybody, but playing and making a living. Did that for quite a while. And like I told you, Bob inspired me to get my own studio set up in my house. So I made a bunch of demos with people, and I started taking little substitute gigs, like when engineers wanted to be off for the weekend. You know, I would know enough about certain rooms to go in with the band and just get them on tape. One day when the boss of the studio I was subbing at, it was called Secret Sound here on 24th Street, Danny Weiss, one of my mentors, I call him my rabbi. He was walking out of the building. As I was walking in, he said, "Where are you going, Dave?" I said, "Well, I'm just going to go down in the room and fool around. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I'll get to know the Kurzweil 250 a little better," something like that. He said, "Come take a walk with me. I'm going to go interview for a job at a new studio as the manager, and they need a guy." So that was Counterpoint. That was owned by Jerry Ragavoy, who was the original owner of the original Hit Factory on 48th. He built the Hit Factory, and he's also the composer of "Time Is on My Side," which was the Stones cover that was so big, and he wrote the whole Joplin album, "Take a Piece of My Heart." He was a really, really good songwriter. And he had a MIDI room with a 24-track and a Trident B, Series B, 32 ins and 24 returns. So if you can learn the room by the weekend, you can have the session that's coming in on Monday. We're opening the room for business. And then, sure, I can do it. They had a software called Performer, which I had never heard of. I was working in Steinberg on my Atari ST. And he had a Mac, an actual one of those all-in Macs. We're talking the 85, 86 now. And it had to be Performer 1.3 or something like that. But I kind of knew how to get around on a sequencer, but I had to learn all the keys and keystrokes and everything. And so I stayed there all weekend and learned how to get stuff into the sequencer, back to the tape, back out to the speakers. And Monday morning, I had a job, $10 an hour, and in walked Grandmaster Flash with Melly Mel. And that was my very first, paid for hire recording session. And I was completely hooked. I was still playing. So some sessions I would tell the clients, I got to leave at 4 o'clock. I got a wedding in Huntington I have to play. And they were like, "You're the engineer. The engineer doesn't leave. What are you talking about?" And so then I quickly realized, I'm going to have to choose one way or the other. And I was so psyched to be on records. It just, I finally saw my name on a 12-inch and they spelled it wrong, David Darling. But I didn't care. I sent it to my mom. "Hey, Mom, I'm on a record. Look." You know the feeling, it's so completely addicting. And then, then you meet these wonderful people of all abilities and stripes and everything. Some people are just naturals, and then some people have to be you have to guide them along, and it's kind of great.
Let me ask you a little bit more about that first session. What were those guys like? And was it the message they were cutting, or right?
They had the message out. They called it. They were just. I think it was remixing some stuff that they had, because they had the vinyl of Furious, and they were scratching Furious, Furious, and Sylvia Robinson was there, from the label, and I really didn't know. I knew who the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five was, but I didn't really know who she was, how powerful she was in hip hop. Hip hop was super brand new. I mean, it'd been out 5 or 6 years, but they were some cutting edge guys.
Yeah, of course, she was the head of Sugar Hill, and she also had some hits in her own right, like Pillow Talk.
Yeah, Pillow Talk.
Yeah, where did you stand mentally with hip hop at that point? Were you like, this, I don't know if this is real music, or were you into it?
No, in New York at the time, the genres were kind of blurred together. There was all kinds of stuff on the radio, and the radio was blasting out of the boutique. So everywhere you went in the city, you would hear really what was at that time top 40. And, of course, those guys were on there, but also Latin freestyle was big, the Latin Rascals and Louis Vega and Jelly Bean Benitez. That was a big genre. And the pop rock of the day, Taylor Dane, or, those kind of, I'm thinking back however many years that was. It probably blur the years, but that's what was going on. So
the new wave and the alternative stuff.
Yeah, the new wave stuff. So you tried to be not a genre-based engineer. There were guys who were specialists in rock and stuff. Those, you had to kind of know a lot about the gear to make a pop rock tune. But to just put down a hip hop track, you need a drum machine and a tape recorder and then a good microphone. And Counterpoint had some good mics and a good vocal space. You had to go through the vocal booth to get out to the coffee machine. So when the guy went into the booth, you couldn't get out to use the restroom or have a coffee until he was done. But they threw the beat down. It took me a while to get it synced. Back then there was a thing called SMPTE, which you had on track 24, and that ran the drum machines. First time I passed the SMPTE, I wasn't in record. It ran the tape for 15 minutes and didn't record anything, and I had to apologize and say, hey, sorry, we got to do it again. And they were very patient with me. They were all about the music. But
so when you were coming up, Dave, and you were more on the performance side, who are some of your own favorite musical people?
Well, I started in a garage band in the British invasion of the 60s. So, Beatles and Stones and Kinks and Beach Boys and all that. And then I remember an older kid, I was probably in maybe 9th or 10th grade, and an older kid knocked on the garage door, and he said, I'm going to tell you what the new thing is. Soul music. And we were like, huh? What's soul music? And so he said, if you guys can learn Mickey's Monkey perfectly, I'll give you each $5. And so we thought, this is great. We had a little trio, so we learned Mickey's Monkey, and of course we never saw him again. He didn't give us our $5. But that was that was when I really got turned on to Stax and Atlantic and all that good stuff that was coming out then. And you sort of discover R&B singing. My way into R&B was through these amazing vocals. Like, wow, how do they sing like that? And I got to be make some black friends and go to their homes, and they would sing in their homes. Like after dinner or something, Dad would say, "Carry the cross," and then the whole family would join in 4-part harmony. And my mind was blown. I'm like, that kind of stuff never happened at my house. I don't know. This tradition is not really familiar territory. And of course they were so welcoming. They didn't really see you as a white kid. You're just their friend, their son's friend or whatever, and you come over for dinner and you eat. And it was very eye-opening. And so that was kind of my way in culturally into that. And so
like going to a Baptist church for the first time.
Yeah, kind of, but really knowing the families and stuff, and them being so kind and welcoming, and and of course this is late 60s, so there's racial stuff going on in the country, and the war stuff and all that. And I came of age. I remember the first Earth Day, and we sat in the administration building and burned our draft cards and all that stuff. But meanwhile, the music was really, really growing on me, and I got into jazz, as I told you, in college, and my friends and I went to see the Headhunters group, and it was a band I had never heard of. They were opening for a band I'd never heard of called Earth, Wind and Fire. Mm-hmm. And so we were, at the time, when you get into jazz, you kind of get a little bit snobby, like, I don't want to listen to this pop stuff anymore. And so we watched Herbie, and he was awesome, of course. And then we said, we don't want to stay for this pop crap. Let's leave. And so we started walking out of the arena. It's McNichols Arena in Denver with my band buddies. And they started dragging equipment onto the stage as we were walking out past the front. And we see two sets of congas, and we see a trap drums with this round thing. Like, what the heck is this round thing on the trap? And all these microphones. We said, maybe we should stay for one song. Let's just see what these guys are about. Maybe, And so the lights go down, and Maurice comes out and plays kalimba song. And turns out I'm front row at the Gratitude tour. Completely ignorant of the music and the band, and it's the one where Verdine is in the harness, and he does the bass solo and Shining Star, I think it was, and whoom, 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 and now he's flying out over McNichols Arena, and we were just, I had smoke coming out of my ears, and I was already playing a jazz bass, but I said, man, I gotta figure out how he's getting that sound, and that was our whole thing for the next month, was how to get that Verdine White tone on the bass. It was amazing. So then I was hooked into the pop side of R&B stuff, and later on I got to meet a lot of those cats. Randy Muller is still a dear friend of mine from Sky and Brad's Construction. Yeah, he's still making records and putting things out, and he calls it Soul Biscuit now, if you ever see the Soul Biscuit stuff in England. And we talk about the good old days, and he knows everybody, man. He was really in the middle of that scene.
Yeah, and being in New York, in the 70s, that was the fertile ground for the jazz fusion movement, and so many incredible players at that time. And, I've talked to a lot of guys who were there at that time, and just how you could go out any given night and just soak it up.
And see amazing, Mikkels and SOBs and Hoppers. It was, the Brecker brothers were here in town at that time, and the funk people too were out playing at night. Stuff, Richard T. and Stuffy Edwards. You could just go see them at Mikkels. It was really, and I remember being here and trying to break into the recording scene. And one of my buddies was a really good bass player. He wrote "This Time I'll Be Sweeter," that Roberta Flack song, and he had some studio gigs. He showed me the chart that they gave him when they got to the studio, and then he played me the cassette of what they had made from the chart. This is the real roots of that R&B, that session stuff, like the Motown guys and James Jamerson. They take a chord chart that the arranger has written, and they make the bass lines and the guitar lines right then and there. The 5 of them or the 4 of them, and then all of a sudden you got a song. And I'm looking at the chart going, you mean you took this E flat and this A flat and you made this cassette? It was amazing.
So Dave, how did your skills evolve and progress?
1 second, come in. Hey, I'm doing an interview. You can come in and wait in the lounge. Come on in, it's totally cool. That's my 11 o'clock, man. I'm so sorry. Sorry, okay. Here we go. We'll cut all that out.
So how did your skills develop and evolve in the studio?
Well, I was a pretty decent bass player, and when drum machines came out, I remember my drummer really hated it, but there was usually one trigger in the drum machine. I had an Oberheim DX, and you could put a little switch in there and play one sound. So I actually brought it on the gig and put like a little foot switch on the floor next to me, and I would play the bass and play claps at the same time in the groove. And the drummer was hating it, but now we sounded like disco or funk. And I started programming beats in drum machines and really going, wow, you can almost make this sound like a real drummer, and it was really, really fun. I remember walking past Rogue Music, which is here on 30th Street. It's an old music store. They sell used gear, and in the front window one day I saw a computer, probably an Atari or maybe even whatever was before that. And I thought to myself, what is a computer doing in a music store? I go to get my strings, I get my guitar stand, I get my pedals, but computer? So I got a little scared. I thought, wow, the world is going to pass me by if I don't find out what this computer stuff is about. So I told you I bought an Atari ST, and I had Steinberg Pro 24. It looked like an Asian newspaper. I couldn't figure out what was going sideways and what was going up and down. But, I puzzled it out, read the manuals, and I got it to spit back a little something that I typed in, and then, wow, this is really, really cool. And then of course I told you about meeting Bob, and he had tape. He had an editing block with a razor blade, so he's taking pieces of things and shortening them. So that was really interesting to me. And then I finally bought a Fostex 8-track. Then I synced it up with my drum machine. I had one little synthesizer, and I could play the bass, and I could play a little guitar. So little singers started coming over. This was the era of What's Love Got to Do with It? Pretty simple Sade-ish kind of simple tracks. There's not that many parts, so we would listen to the parts. People would want to sing a cover of, let's say, What's Love Got to Do with It, and I could make it happen. Do 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 do. Play the little flute line, and that's how I did it. I started making demos. Of course, when you're playing live, you kind of have a little sound knowledge because you have to run your PA and you have to set your amp and balance things so the audience digs it. So it was kind of a body of knowledge. It's not directly transferable, but you know how to work the board. If you put the volume too loud, it's going to feedback and stuff like that. So that was the beginning of the skill set, I would say. And you just learn while you earn. Keep doing it.
Well, cutting tape, that's a skill that I lost skill right there, boy.
Yeah, man. I cut a Prince master once. Of course, it was a copy of it, but we were doing a remix of Party Man, and the producer wanted to have one of the choruses right now. So shoot, we had to, I cut the 24 track after I duped it.
So I want to I made a list of some of the artists I saw in your credits. I wanted to just throw out there and find out, what your involvement was, maybe how you came in the project, what your memory is of that particular.
Sure.
So do you typically get to meet the artists, or you typically only work with their recordings?
Yeah, usually most of those really big artists that I have on my credits, I was just working on the record for them with their team or whoever they designated. Like on Party Man, I did, the A&R guy from the label did speak to Prince when we were getting close to done, and his man answered the phone, so I heard his voice way in the background going, "Yeah, man, it's cool." But now somebody like Luther came to my studio and sang, and Luther was a sweetheart. I missed up. He was very meticulous about his vocal punching. We would punch a breath. He'd say, I don't like the way that breath sounds right before that phrase. So we're just going to punch the breath, okay? And okay, now we're talking tape with logistics and breaks and speed and everything, and you have to be in and out. So one punch of Luther's I actually did mess up, and he was in the booth, and I thought he was going to be really upset. And he said, "That must have been that acid you took in college." He was a sweetheart, and that came through Fonzie Thornton, who I knew for a long time. He's a background singer in town and a well-known guy. He was Luther's kind of best friend and took care of a lot of Luther's business and stuff. So that was fun. Digable Planets I met through my manager and their manager shared an office, and they were unhappy with the way things were going. They were doing a Coneheads song for the Coneheads movie. And they were unhappy with the way it was going, and they said, who can come in and save this? And the other manager recommended me, and I went over and met them, and we became lifelong friends. I worked on tons of stuff with them.
How does your approach differ if it's a R&B like Luther, or versus hip hop versus something that's rockier? How do you approach it differently?
Well, the main thing is when you meet somebody you never worked with, is you have to make them feel, number one, make them feel as comfortable as possible. And number two, make them feel like there's nothing you would rather do in life than make their record better. That's the vibe you have to walk in with. And you have to have a little sense of urgency, like, could you move the mic up a little bit? You can't saunter in. You can't have a sip of coffee and saunter in and move the mic. You have to jump up out of your chair and go, "Yeah, man, how's this? Does this feel okay? Is this how you like it?" And once you establish that rapport that, you'll do whatever it takes to further them, then they chill and they begin to learn to like you. On the Sting album I did, he had already started it in his castle in Italy, and they had gone to LA to do vocals, and he wasn't happy. So the producer brought them back, said, I know a guy in New York who's great with vocals. First thing he says is, first he walks in and, who's the new guy? That's Dave. You're going to like him. Hi, Dave. I don't want to hear those cellos, and I'm looking at this song for the very first time. There's hundreds of tracks, and they're automated. So I turn off the cellos and I press play, and the cellos pop back on because the automation pops them back. No, I don't want to hear those cellos. Oh, I'm sorry. And I finally get them off. And I'm thinking, man, I blew this gig. I won't be here tomorrow. And then, but we worked all day, and he's like, I'd like to do the bridge again. And I'm musical, so I know where the bridge is. A lot of engineers, where's the bridge? Is that 2 minutes, 17 seconds? After I listened to the song once, I've written down the marks where everything was. If it's tape and if it's Pro Tools or something, you can type that and you can see it. So the point being, be a member of their band. If he says we want to rehearse the bridge, go, yeah, okay, I'm ready. But I'm the engineer, but I'm ready on the bridge, even though I'm not a player. So it's really important to let them know that you've got your co-pilot chair really covered and you're on the ball. And then people relax, and then you start swapping stories. Then you're boys after that. It's really fun.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be for sure. Where does the producer's role and the engineer's role intersect, and how do they differ?
It's getting blurrier and blurrier. I just did a video course for the Waves plugin company, and that was the thrust of what we were talking about. The course was built around the idea that production and mixing is blurred now, and so we interviewed some really top producers, and I asked them, when do you start mixing? And they said, from the first sound that I record, because it used to be the domain of the giant consoles and $1,000 a day studios, and you had to be an engineer to work all that technology to further the producer's idea. But now the producers all have Logic or Performer or Pro Tools or Ableton, and they're able to pull in these plugins that I've made presets for, and they can go, Dave Darlington master, and then they have my chain right there. So that's good and bad. I still feel like they trust me to finalize the things. Like, for example, Randy he was working in Logic now, and his mixes are great by the time I get them. So we spend most of the day just A-Bing between his mix and what we're doing currently to make sure it's an improvement. So how's that snare? Okay, great. How's that slap on the vocals? Great. Yeah, no, I think you had it a little better. Let's look at your file and see what you had. So now we're collaborating more as technicians and mixers. Everybody knows the plugins and stuff. Oh, what do you use? Oh, I like to use this delay. So we trade on that level. It's very blurry now, producing and mixing. And most of the producers I know are actually really, really good mixers. Their stuff comes to me 95% done, and I just polish it a little bit.
Have you ever had a situation where you thought that the material was best served with a particular mix or sound, and the artist or the producer were like, no, we want it this way, and you're like, okay, whatever?
Yeah, no, that happens quite a bit. It usually happens with younger artists, who want to be assertive, and I don't really mind that, because that's the younger people are kind of the lifeblood. You have to tell yourself not to be an ageist and not to be like, no, I know better than you. Sometimes young kids they really kind of don't know what they're doing, but they come up with something really ingenious. You can't block that off, or be the guy that says, no, get off my grass. No, you can't do that. That's wrong. Now, on the other hand, sometimes the singers, they do want their voice up a little too loud, so where the music sounds not as strong as it could be. And I always let them have a pass of the way they want it. 9 times out of 10, I'll get an email of like, maybe you could bring that vocal down a half a dB and bounce one for us. And of course I can.
Would you say overall it's a little simpler nowadays if you know the technology? Because in general, there's fewer musicians, real musicians, playing a bunch of different intricate parts and things like that.
Well, that's another mixed bag. We can get a lot done in a short time, because of the technology, we can come back to it a year later and it's going to pop up exactly like it was. I mean, think about in the 70s, if you made a mix and you regretted the hi-hats level the next day, you know, it was a couple $1,000s to go back to that studio and plug everything in again and make sure it matched. Oh, now the background vocals don't sound, oh, here's why, you know, somebody bumped the compressor. You know, $2,000 later, you brought your hi-hat down a half a dB. Now you don't have the regret. Nowadays, we can go back and kibitz a whole album in an afternoon. It's super easy, but it also makes people very lazy, particularly the players. I mean, even good players, and I kind of roll my eyes at these guys. Oh, you know, you got what you need, right? You can edit later. Nah, man, learn the song and play it down like the way they used to do. But that's the times we're in. But, you know, as well as I do, the more you can get that human factor the first time and everything right and the good sound and also the interplay between players. I'm set up today to do a session where we're recording some violin and the producer is a trumpet player. And they're going to play together because he wants the interaction. And, you know, I think that's really smart. I think that's great. They're going to be watching each other and bouncing off each other's ideas. And it's going to be much cooler than just having one overdub at a time.
Well, for me, that's where the magic happens.
Absolutely.
So you already mentioned a few of the artists I had on my list. Let me jump through a few more. Vanessa Williams.
Vanessa Williams, I was lucky enough to be in that very first, the big album. Bruce Carbone was one of the A&R guys on that album, and he knew me from work that we'd done together. So there was a song called Freedom Dance that they had started that they hadn't finished, and they wanted to finish it in New York. So I got to come in and program some overdubs and mix it. And Vanessa came to hear it and everything, but I didn't record her at that time. However, the album was a smash, of course. And I actually worked on Running Back to You a little bit. Those producers came into Counterpoint to do some overdubs. But Vanessa remembered me, and we just made a new album together literally 8-9 months ago. We went and recorded with her band, and her pianist Henry Hay produced it, and it's really, really good. She's, you know, she still sings great. She still looks great, and she's just the nicest person to work with you ever want to meet. And she remembered me from back in those times, which I was flabbergasted. And we had a great time. We cut strings. We actually in my studio cut some strings, and she did her vocals here. It was awesome. It came out great.
Wow. Phyllis Hyman.
Phyllis Hyman was also a dear friend. The songwriters, the lyricists on Don't Want to Change the World introduced me to her. In fact, Will Downing actually sang the demo, but they knew Nick Martinelli, her producer. They had some covers of their writing with Nick. So we had this song, Don't Want to Change the World, and they pitched it to Nick, and Nick said, this will be great for Phyllis. So we cut it in Miami. I flew to Miami with Nick and Phyllis, and he doesn't produce anymore. He still lives in Miami, but he was the consummate, I call it diva whispering. Because, you know, all these stars have a little bit of self-doubt, you know, and particularly Phyllis was a little nutty. And he was just like, oh, honey, it's going to be great. You sound fabulous. And, you know, he would just say whatever would needed to be. I was amazed watching that happen. He was the first diva whisperer I ever really met. And she just loved him. She sang great, and it became a hit. Now, we were actually working on a song when she passed away here in this studio. And I have a chorus with no verses. She never got to finish the verses. And, of course, Gamble and Huff owned the rights to that. But she would sit here on the sofa. She would not go in through the glass, because you know how when the singer's behind the glass and you finish a take, if you don't press the talkback button, they don't hear you, but they can see your mouths moving. So, you know, if you turn to one another and go, she would get very nervous about, like, what are you guys saying about my singing? Is everything okay? So she refused to go in behind the glass, and she sat right here on the sofa with a handheld, very much that Marvin Gaye style that you hear about. And she was singing. She was singing the demo of the song. It's called "Found Another Lover," someone like no other. And I have the chorus on my backup drives, but I don't have any verses.
Well, given her interstate and have the diva whispering and all that, would she require a lot of takes to really get it right? Or
Oh, she was amazing. I mean, she would do multiple takes just to be sure. But I mean, yeah, I knew about her from I used to love those Norman Connors records, that she's on, and I knew about her way long before I met her, and I always thought her voice, all those Philly International voices, if you think about it, there's really Lou Rawls. Like, who else sounds like Lou Rawls, and who else sounds like Phyllis Hyman, and who else sounds like Teddy Pendergrass? They're like one of a kind voices. So and believe me, when she sings, there's a few singers I could name there that I always call it the thanks for the goosebumps, because sometime during that hour the hair on your arm is going to stand up. Who else is like that is Jocelyn Brown. Jocelyn Brown, she lives in England now. We're old friends. I was on one of her very first tours with Somebody Else's Guy, and man, when she lets loose and gets that gospel spirit, but you're doing a funk tune, there's nobody can touch it. It's unbelievable. Like, you're just in the booth, in the control room, going, man, this is why I do this. Now I remember why I stay up, and I don't see my family, because every once in a while there's some humanity that you can't understand how it's even possible. It's just incredible.
Wow,
Whitney Houston was like that too. The way I met Whitney was her mother was making an album of gospel, and she wanted to have the family on some of the songs. And Whitney was already a very big star, and Joe Joubert was the producer. He's a big time Broadway guy now, and Benny Diggs was his partner. And we had to wait for Whitney. She was so busy and everything. We booked the studio, and a whole day she couldn't make it. She's coming. No, she's not coming. And finally, the next day she came, and that was she was very nice too, even though she was already a superstar.
What about Janet Jackson?
Janet Jackson, I was just working with C.J. McIntosh, who was, she had approval of everything, but I didn't really meet her. But we did That's the Way Love Goes, the clubby version that was all over the radio. That's the C.J. McIntosh version. So she has a lot of layers.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And the staff.
Similar to Prince, probably.
Yeah.
Jody Watley?
Yeah, Jody Watley, that was a Masters at Work gig, and she was really, I mean, I loved Shalimar when Shalimar was out, and she was very, very professional and dedicated. She's a non-diva. She'll work and work and work, and very, very nice to everybody. Always concerned if I was comfortable, and I was thinking, Jody, it's my job to make you comfortable. But thanks for asking. Yeah, she was one of the ones that falls into the non-diva category, and a great singer. She's a really good interpretive singer in terms of the message of the song.
What about some of the singers that maybe aren't so great? Maybe their voices are kind of thin. How is it from your position to, make them sound better than maybe they really are?
Yeah. I mean, today we have a lot of technology. Back in the analog days, we used to synchronize the MIDI controls of a thing called the H3000 harmonizer, which you could pitch. So, if the vocal was a little bit sour, we would run it through the harmonizer, which was tracking MIDI and syncing up to the MIDI, and then I would dial plus and minus, to get the pitch, and then you'd rewind the tape and listen. Oh, it's a little too far, so you would edit the MIDI data. Of course, now we have Melodyne and Auto-Tune. And the trick nowadays with those things is to be so benign that people don't even realize you're using it. Even on really pretty well-known singers nowadays, I'll go in and touch up a note here or there, but you keep the nuance of the note. You keep the scooping and the vibrato and everything. You just make the center of the note hit the target, and suddenly that's a good sound and everything. When somebody's maybe some of the younger singers are thin, then you have to use kind of effects and stuff to disguise it, delays or saturation, the plugins that emulate tape saturation to make them a little fatter sounding. But you know, you really can't beat a good performance ultimately, right? But you know, there's old saying, it's not the mix, it's the arrangement. And you know, if the performance is there and the arrangement is great and things aren't getting in each other's way and they're augmenting each other, the mix is easy, man. You just balance it, like make music out of it.
Now you mentioned seeing Herbie in the '70s, which
Yeah.
I envy you there. I'm such a big Herbie fan. I did see him in the late '70s, but not in that prime Headhunters.
Yeah. Well, I always loved I loved the septet, you know, prior to Headhunters with
Yes,
Benny Maupin and Eddie Henderson. That was my job. That was my stuff. The Warner Brothers years when it Crossings and Mawandishi. He was just making some otherworldly stuff, but then, you know, he can funk. I mean, there's YouTube videos out there of I don't know, it's playing with Omar and Stanley and the funk, the body language of the funk, and they're just grinning and smiling, and they're having such a good time when they're playing their behinds off. It's incredible.
it's phenomenal. So, but you eventually got to get a credit with him.
Yeah, I worked a little bit on Gershwin's World towards the end of it as a sort of a consultant. I did some moving parts around and everything. The producer of that record, Robert Satan, is a dear, dear friend. He's another one of my rabbis, and he's all about quality. You know, in fact, on that record, he actually called the factory and told them to hold up the press because he felt the ballad was a little too loud compared to the others, and he wanted to go back on Monday and have the mastering engineer bring it down. And he got in trouble from the record company, like, you don't call the press, we call the plant. You don't call the plant. It's like, well, but the ballad was a little too loud, you know. Okay. And so he brought me in towards the end of the process, and Bruce Swedien was the mix engineer on that. And we would sit at the end of the day when Bruce went home and play back the mixes, and he would ask me, what did I think, and could we use a little more horns, and how loud was the voice and stuff like that. So I got to do a little tracking, and I was a mix consultant. It was really great.
That is very cool. All those, like, what was it, 20 to 30 years later from when you saw him perform?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. But, you know, I've gotten to brush shoulders with all of the Miles second great quintet. Ron Carter's been here. In fact, Ron Carter gave me his pickup. He bought a new pickup for his upright. And he's, you know, we were working together on something for Donald Harrison. And he said, Dave, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, I'm busy tomorrow, but I get off at 7 on Wednesday. He goes, meet me at the Blue Note. I got something for you. I thought he was going to give me one of his method books or maybe sign a CD or something. So I got to the Blue Note, and he was having a seltzer at the bar. And, hey, Ron, he goes, I want you to have this. And it was his old pickup from his upright, because he had just gotten a new one. We play the same upright bass. We found out by vibing. And he says, you know, we play the same instrument. I want you to have this. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So I actually, on my upright in my house, have Ron Carter's pickup. How cool is that? I mean, that's like having a Mickey Mantle autographed baseball. Come on.
Absolutely. Wow. I was fortunate enough to get to see the reunited Return to Forever at the Blue Note a few years back with Stanley on acoustic, and
nice.
That was phenomenal.
Yeah, those records were so important to us because we were rockers and jazzers, and that was the meld of that, you know. Mahavishnu Orchestra and, of course, Weather Report. Jocko grew up an hour north of me in Fort Lauderdale. He was a year older than me. And, you know, there was always rumors about this kid that could really play. You know, I'm in high school, like, I can't be that good. Then I finally saw him a couple times in the Miami area. And then I went off to college. And the next thing I know, his solo album comes out, and he's the bass player in Weather Report. Like, holy moly, this guy really did hit the big time, and deservedly so, you got to say.
Let's see, a few more quick hits here, Dave. Pieces of a Dream?
Yeah, Pieces of a Dream are good buddies of mine. They're in Philadelphia, and that also comes through Danny, the guy that took me over to Counterpoint. He's an A&R guy at Shawnee Records now, which they were a world label, but they kind of made their bones in smooth jazz and gospel and stuff. And yeah, they're great guys. They're super talented. It's really just the two of them, and they program all their own stuff. I've mastered quite a few of them, and I think I've mixed 2 of their latest ones. So they're really fun guys.
And kind of in a similar vein, the Jazz Funk Soul with Jeff Lorber
Yeah, that's because I really knew. Oh my God, my brain. Chuck Loeb was my buddy for years and years. He was, he was a session guy around town and one of the greatest guitar players I ever met. And that also came through Shawnee, but Chuck recommended me for that. So that was, yeah, Loeber's. And Karen White, he discovered Karen White, really. She was in the Jeff Loeber Fusion, and then she hooked up with LA and Babyface.
Did you work with her at all?
I worked on that album some because the A&R guys were here in New York. Dave Shaw was one of the A&R guys. So I actually heard, what's the early in the morning? Superwoman. The tape of that has Babyface singing the lead exactly the way Karen White sings it on track 23. He ghosted it so that she could copy it. I'm not your superwoman, but he's singing it in the female key. Babyface has that high false.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, I took it off to Dad. This is years ago now, but I can remember, man, I got to get this on Dad because nobody will believe it that Babyface actually sang Superwoman. But that's how they would do their demos for the artists. They would really be mocked up perfectly for them.
It reminds me of the Prince release they just put out, the originals that has him laying it down for all those other artists.
Yeah, he could do all the parts. He didn't need anybody else.
Yeah. Soul to Soul.
Yeah, Soul to Soul I met through Paul Simpson, and that was a Paul Simpson remix. And I actually went up to the store in Camden Town to meet everybody when I was there in the probably 89 or 90, and yeah, that was just that was a remix gig, and I worked on Eat Beach of the War Goddess, I think was the name of her solo album, wasn't it? Am I? You're asking me to remember things. I got old age disease right now, man. I'm trying to remember all the credits. Karen Wheeler.
Yeah.
Beach of the War Goddess. I did most of that album, of her solo album, but she had moved to, she's in New York. And but man, I always love those vocals. I when you get to hear them on the multi-track, however do you want me, when you solo those vocals, they're incredible. And they're super layered. I'm sure they had a safety of the track, and they did 24 tracks of stacked vocals to do that. I live at the top of the stairs. That's another hair-raising moment when you hear those vocals in solo. She's wonderful.
Mint Condition.
Yeah, Stokely's been here a bunch of times, man. He's the leader and producer of the band, and super smart mixer. So we mix together, and I've mastered a couple of theirs since then. They're mostly touring, so they do it wherever they can. But we're buddies. He calls me every once in a while. Hey, man, I saw this new plugin. Do you think I should get it? So he likes to pick my brain about what's hot.
You studio geeks together.
Studio geeking out, but he's a killing musician. So I mean, Mint Condition. You think about that stuff is live. It sounds sequenced. They're so tight. Their rhythm is so good, and he plays on other people's stuff too. I've heard some stuff where he's been a guest on other people's stuff, and it's just great. He's a really, really good musician, and he knows the studio, so he knows how to get really good sounds really quickly. Been doing it a long, long time.
Yeah, they're like part of the endangered species of actual R&B bands.
Yeah, like the Roots. The Roots are keeping that going now. But yeah, Mint Condition was the precursor to them.
Mm-hmm. Arthur Baker, you worked with him?
Yeah, of course. The Shakedown Studios. We worked on "Listen Up" by Quincy Jones, which had all those. I don't know if you remember that. So it was the movie about Quincy's life, and it had the guest, like thousands of guest artists, Chaka Khan and this one and that one, and that was analog. So he had, the LA2A, the limiter that you use on vocals because it's a tube and it's warm. So we had one LA2A rented for each singer, and the singers would be on the same track. So we would split them out to a different fader and pop them on and off. Okay, now it's Stevie, now it's Chaka, now here it's so and so. And the stack of LA2As, I can remember I was worried it was going to tip over because it was so tall. There had to be 12 or 13 of them stacked up to the roof. We rented everyone in town. And he worked on that mix for probably 2 weeks. He had a studio called Shakedown. And, you know, he was the first guy I knew, a person, not a business, that actually bought an SSL board. I remember him telling me, yeah, Dave, I just paid off the last payment on the SSL. You know, I didn't have any equipment of that nature at the time. I thought, man, that's incredible. You actually own one of these giant robotic boards. That's amazing. And he kept it for many years, but you know, I still talk to him. I mean, through Facebook or whatever all the time. He lives in Miami now, and but he was kind of a diva producer. You know, he could be rough on people if you weren't giving him what you were doing. But if you were doing what he was asking of you, then he was, you know, your best buddy and very supportive. And, you know, I love him dearly, man. He's great. But I've seen him get angry at people before. But super smart. You know, he's basically a DJ, you know, and the thing about the DJ as producer is they have their pulse on the zeitgeist. They're out there playing these giant parties all the time. So, I mean, you know, who knew that Bombada thing would be such a huge thing? Well, he always told me that he knew right away what they had, you know, before it came out. And he's proved it over and over and over. He's done it a million times. He's worked with U2. He's worked with a lot of cats.
Yeah, that's quite a path.
Yeah.
And what did you win your first Grammy for? How did that feel when that happened?
That was actually Wayne Shorter, and it wasn't even on my mind that it was even up for a Grammy. I was just so stoked to be working with Wayne Shorter, and those were analog days. So we did mixes in various rooms about town. One of the songs on that album is actually the rough mix after the session. We never could beat it, and Wayne's instructions to me as he left, you know, he's finished recording. He doesn't want to know anything about the mixing. He said, Dave, make it sound like Acapulco at sunrise. And I thought, okay, I guess so. And then I thought about it, and, you know, that means actually something, you know, make it pastel and gauzy and, you know, orange and blue, you know, light pastel and watercolory. That's kind of what we went for on that album. And so I then knew it had won the Grammy, but I wasn't thinking about the actual statue or anything. There's tons of people worked on that record. I just came in late as I tracked a bunch of it and I mixed the whole thing. So I could get home one day from work with I was with my wife somewhere because we got out of the car together and there's a box on the porch. We bring, did you order something? No, I didn't order. What is this? We brought it inside and I opened up the box and I took out the foam piece from the top, and I didn't look in the box. I looked at the foam, and of course it was the silhouette, the negative of the Grammy shape, you know, the gramophone shape. I was like, holy, look at what this is. And there it was in the box. That's 2003, and I'm listed as the mixer. And you know, it was one of my proudest moments. And the fact of who it is, I mean, it's Wayne Shorter. Weather Report was probably one of the biggest things in my college youth. You know, I'm trying to learn how to play jazz, and people are telling me, you know, listen to Kind of Blue, but I like this rock stuff, and it's funky. And now I have a Grammy with one of the founding members of Weather Report, and I couldn't be prouder of that. I mean, if that's the only thing I ever did in the business, I'd be okay.
That description had a certain what he was looking for, a certain Miles Davis kind of.
Totally. Well, Wayne is a kind of a high concept space cadet. You know, like he just wants to, like, he'll be putting his horn together, you know, and he'll say like, "I'm so excited about what's about to happen." You know, he's just one of those savants. You know, he knows at any given day you could make the next great thing.
Wow. I know we're getting tight on our time. Do you have time for two more questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Out of all of this, Dave, maybe it was just what you said, but can you maybe pick out one or two of the most vivid memories on this trip you've had?
Yeah, we've kind of touched on them. Being in the room recording Wayne, Jocelyn Brown singing, uh, going to England to work. Meeting George Martin in the studio. We were over there working on Adiva, who was a Jersey House. She was actually a school teacher, I think, and she was a killing singer. So we were working on her record for Cool Tempo, and I'm at Air Studios in London, the George Martin's Air group, and I say to the secretary, I'm a huge fan of George Martin. If he's around, if I could just say hello and tell him what he meant. She said, "Oh, I'll pass it along. He's working in his own. He has his own private Studio A. I was in Studio B, the Wings studio, where Paul McCartney made a lot of Wings records. Sure enough, 4:00, tea time. Ding, 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 ding. So George will see you now." So I walked 6 feet off the ground down to Studio A and knocked on the door. I was like, "Oh, come on in. We're just finishing up." And he was doing an opera singer singing pop, one of those kind of records, and the score was strewn across the board, and his engineer was writing. George was pointing to the score, and the engineer was writing the oboe or whatever it was, and he finished up, and he spent about an hour just, so you're an engineer? Oh, yes, great, and I was trying to get him to talk about Beatle records, and you've made so many great records. Can you tell me about some of them? And he ended up talking about Live and Let Die, the James Bond song. Well, we made a little tune for a James Bond film, I'm sure he's been asked to do that shtick a million times. He's probably got it down to a science. But to me, it was fresh, and he was so kind and so generous with his time. He stayed another 45 minutes after his session just chewing the fat, and we got to take a picture. And, here's a guy who basically invented a genre. or at least guided it into existence, back in the day.
Wow, incredible. What would you recommend to somebody today if they want to, get into recording their own music? What would you start with?
Well, there's two things. There's two skill sets. The musical skill set. So you have to really practice an instrument. You can't just pick up a violin and expect to be Asha Heifetz. It's not going to happen. Playing an instrument is a serious lifetime commitment. Even a guitar or a synthesizer or something. You can do the presets and the preset beats. That's great, but you really have to learn. And there's, like anything, there's levels. So you learn some chords, you learn some scales, you copy some melodies by ear, and you build your pool of knowledge. And it's really the same in recording. The first time I plugged in a microphone, it was over compressed and it didn't sound so great. And you learn which pieces of equipment sound better than others. You learn which plugins work better than others. You learn not to overdo things. Just like in playing, somebody who can play a lot and real fast, like, this is great, this is great. You know what? It'd be great if you left a little space once in a while. That's what would be great. And the same with engineering. It would be great if you took out some of those plugins and just let the tone speak for itself. So, my advice would be be tenacious, be open to anything in your music, in your music learning, and always say yes. Be a can-do person.
Outstanding. Dave, it's been a blast.
It's been a blast. I'm sorry it's so short, man, but I have some killer musicians here. Brian Lynch and Regina Carter are about to do like a serious duet. So let me go take care of them, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
See ya.
Bye-bye. Hey, back at Truth and Rhythm headquarters. Thank you for joining us on another magical ride with Truth and Rhythm. Whether you're watching or listening, as always, thank you so much for your continued interest and support. Be sure to subscribe. Go to YouTube. Go to the Funkin' Stuff channel. That's where Truth and Rhythm lives and breathes and thrives. Also, goodies here like TIR Quick Takes. And if you subscribe, you know what? You get the show before anyone else. It's free. If you love jazz, funk, R&B, soul, you can't miss it. Pass it along. Tell a friend. Tell family. This audience is growing, and it is a beautiful thing, all coming together for the love of this great music. Also, if you can throw us a buck or two, we could use the support financially, keeping the lights on, keeping the servers going, all these expenses. If you can help support the program, whatever you can give, much appreciated. Go to the funkinstuff.net website. On the right-hand side of every page, you just click and you can donate through PayPal, credit card, whatever. Very easy to do and so much appreciated. And if you do a sizable donation, I will mention you on the program. Also, drop me a line. Email me at scottg@funkinstuff.net. Let me know who else you'd like to see on the show, what you enjoy about the music. Let's just kibitz and talk about stuff, talk music. You'll find that I respond very quickly, and I much enjoy the rapport and the camaraderie and the interaction. Always remember, this is your show, The True Music Lover. So for now, that's all the time we have for this one. It's a wrap. As always, Scott Dr. GX Goldfine saying, keep on vibrating to the rhythm of the one.